Welcome, folks, and thank you for coming today. This is our first class in a series we're going to be doing. We're planning to do about one class a month, and we're trying to time them according to what you should be doing in your yard at that month. So the first class is Vegetable Gardening in North Carolina. My name's Shannon Hathaway, and I'm an outside sales consultant here at Supersod. Vegetable gardening in general is my passion, but I love growing edibles in my garden, and anytime I can talk to people about that and share that experience, I'm happy. Those of you who've lived in North Carolina long enough know that our soil is miserable. It is hard clay, it's filled with rocks, sometimes there's sand, but you never see beautiful, rich, black soil unless you've been fortunate enough to buy a gardener's home where they've put a lot of work into it. Most of us aren't that lucky. So what we always recommend is you raise your beds, particularly for vegetables. Vegetables need to put in good deep roots, and they have 1 year to do it. It's not like a tree that has many, many years to put in good deep roots. So you want to go up above that heavy compacted soil that we have in North Carolina. So starting a vegetable garden right in your clay is going to be a very frustrating, miserable experience. You want to come up at least 6 inches, 8 to 10 is even better, and do a raised bed. It allows your roots to go deep into the soil. You're not walking on that bed, so you're not compacting the soil. And having a raised bed discourages foot traffic, especially the perfect width for a raised bed is 4 feet wide because you can walk around it and reach in from all sides. You start getting an 8-foot wide vegetable bed and you have to walk into the middle. The whole point is to not have to walk into the middle. The higher the bed, the deeper the roots can go. So if you're growing something like carrots that need to put in, a significant root, you want to raise your bed even higher, and sometimes stacking beds makes a lot of sense. We recommend our Doc's Raised Garden Kit. It's not treated with any chemicals. It pegs together easily, so easily I can do it, so I'll show you outside how that works. And it comes with one big yellow bag of our soil cubed compost, fills 2 garden kits. So a little bit about our native soil. We have red clay. It's very heavy. It makes great pottery. That's why we have such wonderful potters here in North Carolina, but not so good for plants to grow in. It's low in nutrients. It's difficult for plants to put in good deep roots. It holds water, but then it dries and cracks and can damage plants. So we recommend lasagna gardening, which is the way nature gardens, and that's in layers. If you think about it, leaves fall down, plants rot, they start to form a compost layer, that turns to soil, new leaves are falling, it's layer upon layer upon layer. And that's really, anytime we can follow nature's example, we're doing good gardening practices. Vegetables use up nutrients very quickly because they have 1 year. Most of our vegetables are annuals, and so they've got 1 year to do all their growing, so they're very hungry. The growth cycle's fast, demanding, and we need to provide those nutrients if we're going to get a good yield. Chemical fertilizers, while they're great to get your 3 basic nutrients to the plants, they do nothing to add or encourage beneficial soil organisms. They're not giving them any trace minerals, anything like that. So you're better off putting compost, good soil in, than putting in chemical fertilizers. If you add compost every year, you're replenishing some of the nutrients that those vegetables are taking out of the soil. Tomatoes are the hungriest plants out there when it comes to nutrients. So it's often recommended too, not only to add compost to your tomato beds, but to switch out where you plant your tomatoes every year. Rotate your crops. That's what farmers do. They know what they're doing. They're good at it. We need to use them as an example. We recommend our Soil Cubed. It is pure organic compost that we make at our sod farms. We make it out of grass clippings, wheat straw, and cow manure. Turn it constantly and keep it at a temperature of 160 degrees to try to kill off all the weed seeds that are in there. We inoculate it with mycorrhiza and other beneficial organisms to help, because they're in there eating and decomposing. And it is certified by OMRI, the Organic Materials Resource Institute. And what their certification means that it's okay for use in organic vegetable gardens. And the reason for that is we use no residual pesticides. So, where to put your vegetable garden? I go to so many people's houses and you get there in the morning and boy is it sunny, but by afternoon that area is not going to be sunny, or vice versa. Vegetables, most vegetables need 6 or more hours of direct sunlight per day. There are some that can handle a little more shade. Peppers, believe it or not, can take a little bit more shade. But ideally, you want to situate your vegetable garden where it's getting at least 6 hours of sun. A nearby water source is helpful because with a raised bed, it's going to dry out a little quicker than planting in the ground. So you want to be able to get in there and water as much as possible. Protecting your plants from high winds is important so that things aren't getting knocked down, battered, and so that their leaves aren't drying out. High winds will desiccate the leaves, dry them out, and make it harder for the plant to survive. And then fencing. In Cary, believe it or not, we have a lot more wild animals than you would think. I have seen a coyote on Maynard Road, so we have lots and lots of animals that are going to say, oh, look at this wonderful garden. So if you're seeing deer, rabbits, woodchucks, raccoons, exactly, you may want to fence off your garden. And squirrels are everywhere. If you find a way to prevent squirrels, let me know. And then check your HOA covenants if you have an HOA. There are some that don't like you to have vegetable gardens. I don't like rules that tell me I can't have vegetable gardens, but just make sure you check so that you don't invest in this and find out you have to take it down. If you have space limitations, a lot of people say, I'd love to garden and have a vegetable garden, but I live in a condo or I live in an apartment. So square foot gardening is important, and we're going to talk about that outside. I'll demonstrate some of the techniques of square foot gardening. But what it means is to plant as much in a square foot as you possibly can, and to allow companion plants, some that grow up, some that grow sideways. And then use pots. Out on the market now, there are lots of new patio tomatoes, container tomatoes, that you can put in a container. They don't get as big, but they get a heavier stem. It's a tougher plant in a sense, and you get just as much yield on it without having to have a 4 or 5 foot tomato cage. And then you can add vegetables into your perennial and annual beds, and that's one way to hide vegetables if you're not allowed to have a vegetable garden. And that's the British style of gardening. If you can raise your perennial beds up and keep mounding the soil so it's good, you can actually work vegetables and herbs into your perennial and annual beds. They're beautiful. I think they work just fine that way. And then timing. So when you came in along the back, if you didn't get one, I think there may still be some more. I've got a Zone 7 planting chart. It tells you when to plant what. We are so fortunate here. We can plant early spring vegetables. We can plant your traditional summer vegetables that you're harvesting in July or August. And then we can come back in August and put in fall vegetables. I grew up in Massachusetts where we had to wait till May 31st to get our tomatoes in the ground, and you had a very brief period of time to grow vegetables. Here in North Carolina, we have a very long period of time to grow vegetables, so it's easy to rotate your crops, get new things in, and keep the harvest going as long as you can. Consecutive crops is another way to do it. So if you plant peas 1 week, wait a week or 10 days, plant more peas. And the same with your tomatoes. Plant some tomatoes right at April 15th. Wait a couple of weeks, plant some more tomatoes, because what it's going to take them, you'll see on the information that comes with your plant, it'll tell you how many days to fruit production. So if you're delaying planting some things, you're going to extend that crop time. And then rotate your crops in a 3-year cycle. So if you've got one bed that you're putting tomatoes in, move the tomato. If 3 beds is ideal, but if you can move your tomatoes to the next bed and then the next bed and bring them back to that first bed in the 4th year, that way you are extending the life of the soil, the nutrient life of the soil. Keeping a journal is a great thing to do, and I'm not as good about it as I should, but I do have my vegetable garden journal, I talk about when I ordered my hops. I keep my the seed packets here so I know exactly what I planted when, rather than just labeling everything in the garden. I keep it here if I'm growing things from seed. And then if you're looking for a book, this one is my favorite. It's from Taunton. It's called Growing Vegetables and Herbs. I think I got this at Barnes & Noble. And it is just so detailed. Even to the end, it gives you some recipes. It gives you so much information, and on some unusual vegetables and things too. So not just your basic tomatoes and peppers. Pest and disease control. So that's always a big concern here in North Carolina. We have lots of bugs. So what you want to think about is integrated pest management, and what it's called IPM in the trade. And what it means is assessing whether they're acceptable levels of damage or not. Because the fewer chemicals you can put on your fruits and vegetables, let's face it, the better they are for you. So if you're looking at a plant and it's got a hole or two in it, something's been nibbling on it, don't panic. You have to say, okay, I've got a threshold I can allow, and usually it's up to 20% of the plant damage. If I can allow that critter to eat 20% of that leaf, that's fine, and then I don't have to spray anything. When something is defoliating your plant, then you have to start to think about what you're going to do to get rid of that plant, or rid of that pest, sorry. You can plant flowers and herbs that deter pests, attract pollinators and deter pests. So many of you may have had grandmothers who planted marigolds around their tomatoes. There was a reason for that. It wasn't just that the yellow and orange flowers look great with the red tomatoes. There are lots of insects like the tomato hornworm, caterpillar, things like that hate marigolds. Something about the smell, a chemical they release, they don't like them. So it's a good, companion plants are a good way to keep pests off. I have lots of roses. I plant rosemary under my roses and around them. It keeps lots of the bad bugs off the roses. It also keeps the deer away. The deer don't like rosemary. They don't like any of the oily or aromatic herbs. They don't like lavender, that sort of thing. So that's a natural way to do it. If you're trying to control fungal diseases, the best way is to pick up any leaves that fell down on the ground. Because if they sit there and they're starting to decompose and it's moist, that's when you get fungal diseases, and they can go up and onto the plant. So especially if you're seeing fungal diseases and the leaves are dropping, clean those leaves up. And then water consistently. We see a lot of problems with tomatoes where they'll get a rot on the bottom or they'll burst open. Now, if we have heavy rainstorms, you can't control that. But if you're watering inconsistently, then the plant is liable to either wilt or soak up too much of that water and split open. So try to keep consistent watering. Now, let's go outside and get our hands dirty. All right, these are our Doc's garden bed kits. This will be a little like a cooking show where, we show you how to put it together and then we pull the already finished one out of the oven. They are so easy to put together. I had an email yesterday from someone saying, can I build this myself, or do you need to come out and do it? If I can build it, you can build it. So it's a simple peg together system. Just slide in and you just push a peg into the back. Whoop. Slid the peg all the way through. 30 seconds to assembly. Really, really easy. And you're done, right? Except you have to fill it. So someone asked a great question earlier. What if you're setting it down on top of grass? You don't care about the grass that's underneath it very much. Well, we at Supersod here care very much about grass. But if you're putting your garden bed there, the best solution I've found is to line it with newspaper. The newspaper will kill the grass because it's not going to allow it to get any sunlight or any water for a little while. And then the newspaper breaks down, the grass breaks down, and contributes nitrogen to your vegetable garden. You want to fill this with gardening soil, right? My favorite gardening soil, of course, is our soil cubed pure compost. I do that in all my raised vegetable beds. I put it in my houseplants. I top dress my lawn with it. I top dress my annual and perennial beds with it. It's incredible stuff. So you have a 4x8 vegetable garden and you want to cram as many things into it as possible. That's called square foot gardening. Let's get the most impact out of a small space as you possibly can. So the first thing we think about is growing vertically. I've gotten some very simple wooden gardening stakes here. You can use sticks, you can use whatever you want. But it's as simple as pushing them down into the soil. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a trellis for climbing vegetables like cucumbers. Go right up the trellis. Wrong end. Here we go. So I stick 4 of those in. Take my handy dandy soil knife. This is my favorite tool. It cuts, it digs, it measures. I love this thing. Now I want to cut just a few lengths. I'm going to lash the cross pieces onto the uprights. Now you're going to see my awesome rope skills, which are not that great, but we'll see. Yeah, if you don't mind grabbing an end, that would be great. Thank you. Just stabilize that end. Just simply lash this together. Hold it into place. And what we're doing is providing a strong framework for the vegetables to climb up. This one is not going to be perfect by any means, but
it'd be a lot sturdier being able to push these into the subsoil too.
Exactly. We're going down and hitting concrete here. Lash these together, and then my second favorite, very inexpensive, very multi-purpose gardening tool is fishing line. I use fishing line for everything. It's inexpensive. It's strong. If it can hold a marlin, it can hold a plant. And it's invisible. So you can make a bunch of lines of fishing line going up and around your with how I'm doing this, but a bunch of lines going up and down vertically for your climbing plants to twine around and hold on to. That's how I grow my hops at home. I grow hops because my son brews beer, and so we're growing 3 different kinds of hops right now. So then I simply stick a few thumbtacks into the docks kit and start with my fishing line. Notice how you barely even see it. Just loop it around a little, take it over to the next one, loop it around a little, come back down. You can use push pins, you can use nails, whatever you want to secure that. Eye hooks or eye bolts are great. Now you can do that as many times around, going up and down, giving as many climbing surfaces as you can. They climb right up these supports, and then they're not rambling across the garden. So we've jammed those into as little space as possible. We're going to grow our cucumbers vertically. So then you want to think about your larger vegetables going down to your smaller. So of course, your largest are always, at least in my experience, going to be your tomatoes. So you want to give them some space. Every year I make the same mistake. I try to jam way too many tomatoes into my garden. But you want to give them at least 18 inches between. And I like to zigzag them. It allows more airflow in between. So now I've got 3 tomatoes. I can do a line of cucumbers along the back, or peas, or anything you want that climbs up. And then we've got peppers. Peppers need a little height too, but not as much space as the tomatoes. So we go with the same kind of zigzagging process. Peppers are going out in front of the tomatoes because they're not going to get quite as tall. So now we want some things that crawl in between and spill out over the edge, because again, we want to take advantage of, we've got a lot of open space in here, a lot of real estate. So I've got Crook's Neck squash and I've got zucchini here, and I can plant those in these spaces in between. They're not going to compete up. They're going to go and spill out over the edges of the vegetable garden. It will naturally put out tendrils and climb on its own. I like making the plants do all the work. As much of it as possible, at least. Let's see. So I've got some eggplant, which you can actually use climbing here. This is the Ichiban Japanese eggplant. Delightful flavor, delightful texture. I love that plant. And then I work in herbs, because we talked about the fact that got a couple of these, so I can work these in here as well. We talked about how some of the fragrance of the herbs keeps some of the bad bugs off the plants. Dill is going to bring in pollinators. You'll get lots of butterflies and bees and things around your dill. So bringing that towards the front of the bed. Again, we're staying with the taller things towards the back, the shorter things towards the front. So I've got some purple basil. I've got a little culinary sage and some Thai basil, and I've got rosemary. Rosemary is going to be one of your larger herbs, so you want that towards the back, or towards the back of the herb parts anyway. And it's going to keep a lot of bad bugs, as well as potentially some of the mammals, away from your garden. They don't like the smell. So I've got a little Thai basil here, some culinary sage, and then another one of my favorite ground cover herbs we can tuck in the middle. It's oregano. This is Greek oregano, and that will just creep and crawl in under the tomatoes too. I still have room for more. Isn't that great? Huh? Yeah, canning's one of my favorite things to do. Any questions so far before we move on to potatoes? Yes?
For the rosemary to be effective with deer, does it need
You need a lot of it.
potatoes or-
You need a lot of it. I actually have, the way I have my own vegetable gardens, I have a row of roses, because my homeowners association gets a little confused with some of the things I do. We'll leave it at confused. I have a row of roses and a row of rosemary, so they can't really see the raised beds. All they see is this beautiful border of roses and rosemary, and that helps to keep some of the rabbits out. I do occasionally see a rabbit every so often, but if I can border that whole vegetable area in plants they don't like, it helps. Any other
What about
questions?
garlic?
I'm sorry?
Does that help? Garlic?
Garlic doesn't really help. It's funny. I've heard that adding either garlic or hot pepper to oil and spraying it on your bird seed keeps the squirrels out of it. I think I have Cajun squirrels. They just love the hot pepper. They love the garlic. It doesn't stop them at all. So some of these organic things work really well. Some of them not so well. A couple years ago, I found on Pinterest the coolest way to do potatoes. Potatoes require super deep soil, super rich soil, and yes, I can stack some of these boxes and grow potatoes. Potatoes themselves aren't all that expensive, but the ones I like are those little itty bitty ones that are in the little mesh container, and you get this much for $3.99. I'm growing my own. So what we did yesterday, I brought in a couple of these, just a couple big baking potatoes. And a day before you're going to plant them, you need to heal them. And what that means is to let them dry out so they look nice and ugly like this. So we cut them into sections. If they're already growing little roots out of them, cool, but they don't need to be. And I left them outside on paper overnight so that they form a scab here so that they don't rot. And that's the most important part. So you simply take a potato and you cut sections about that big. So you can cut up as many sections as you want. So if you're getting those little itty bitty potatoes that I'm going to be growing at home, I'm going to be doing this probably next week. Next weekend I'll be doing my potatoes. You really only cut those in half. That's all you have to do to get just some small pieces. And then you get a sturdy tomato cage, not the little flimsy ones, but we've got these inside for sale. These are tough. And that's what you really want, is this sturdy tomato cage, because it's about to become a potato cage. And then you take wheat straw, that handy dandy knife again, and you line the inside of it, kind of make a nest with the wheat straw, okay? So I'm going to fill that cavity I've created with compost. And we're going to do layer upon layer upon layer all the way up. So once I've got it to the top of where I had the wheat straw, grab some more wheat straw and continue to make our nest all the way up. I find wheat straw is better for this than pine straw. It holds moisture better. And because we're going up, we're gardening vertically. We want to be able to hold as much moisture in as we possibly can. This is the messy part of the job. Like I said, this is where you get your hands dirty. And what's going to happen is your potatoes are going to start to come out, the leaves and the branches, all the way from the bottom to the top of this tower. It looks really cool as it grows.
So I take it needs the air. Could you also like line it with the weed barrier? Or does it?
You don't really need to, because you want the plants to come out. They're going to come out in between the layers. And their roots are, the plant roots are going to stabilize this whole thing. So those little fingerling potatoes that you're seeing in the markets now, the little purple ones and yellow ones, and they're nice and creamy and delicious, very expensive. Buy one of those, cut the pieces up, do one like this, do one of these towers. How many pounds of potatoes do you think you can produce out of one of these towers? 100 a year, 100 pounds of potatoes. In one potato tower a year. Enough to share with all your neighbors and all your friends. You have You really don't, because they're not going to have a way to get in there. You know, the wind's, other than maybe in the top, the wind's not going to blow them in. They're not going to come up through the bottom. That's a long way up.
And what about pests?
Pests, potato beetles, you kind of pick off for the most part. I'm very into, I know you don't like grabbing the bugs. I've got a very, I get a lot of satisfaction out of grabbing and squishing bugs. I talk to them while I do it. Call them various names. So we're all the way up at the top of the cage now. And before I put that last bit of compost in, I'm going to put my potatoes in. And all I do is they're hard little nuggets. They've been left out overnight.
Doesn't matter, dried side down.
Doesn't matter. Just put them in kind of a loose circle. I've put 5 of those in there. That's 5 potato plants we're going to get. You can mix them up. You can use a chunk from 5 different potatoes. You put a little more compost on the top. And you sit back and wait. And it's really cool. You're going to get branches that come out here, leaves. It's going to look really sculptural. Yes, ma'am?
So you said you put a potato in each layer where you put the...
Nope,
Just at the
potatoes
top.
are just up near the top. Because what you're eating is part of the root system. So now you want potatoes, right? Well, how do you dig all the way to the bottom? You don't. You grab that little knife again. You want some potatoes for dinner and you don't want to kill the plant. You just cut in, feel around with your hand, pull a few potatoes out, close that gap. It keeps going all year.
How much potatoes did you get off those 5?
One tower can produce 100 pounds of potatoes a year.
From those 5 little things?
From those 5 little things. That from one potato. That was 5 eyes from one potato.
So how many of these before you start harvesting?
Before you start harvesting, 60 to 75, depends on the potato, depends on the year. So you can do a little exploratory surgery, go in there and kind of look and see how the potatoes are doing, how big they are. The bigger the potato gets, like a big old russet potato is going to take longer than the little fingerling potatoes. They're pretty quick.
Again, water about twice a week?
Water about twice a week.
Would you start that now?
I'm going to start mine next weekend. What I do, because I'm cheating a little, April 15th is generally our last frost-free date. That's moving a little bit with climate change, but it's pretty standard around April 15th. So about 10 days before April 15th, I look at the 10-day forecast and say, am I going to risk it or not? And I've been burned a couple times doing that, but what I find right now is the selection on the vegetables is best. By April 15th, they're pretty picked over. So I go and get mine a little early. Someone asked earlier where the best place to buy vegetables is. My favorite is the Raleigh Farmers Market. You are buying direct, and this is true of all the plants there, you're buying directly from the farmers. They're making a little more money than if they sell it wholesale. You're paying a little less money than you would if you're buying retail at a nursery. It's a win-win. You can ask them if you go there and you're looking for something specific and they don't have it there. If they're growing it, they'll bring it in the next weekend for you. They're wonderful people, and there are herbs there, trees, shrubs, vegetables, flowers, you name it. And you just walk from vendor to vendor, go over, say hi to the nice folks at Supersod while you're over there, and eat lunch at the fish. You get your cholesterol fill at the fried fish market, which is really good. So any questions? Yes?
If you plant it on April 15th, you start harvesting by somewhere around June.
So July, yeah. June, July, maybe late June.
Okay, and how long will you keep getting potatoes?
Right until November, usually. When we get a hard frost, it's going to kill that plant back. But before that, you can just keep harvesting.
How much sun does that need?
More than it's getting right here. So this is a little deceptive, but we couldn't stick this down into the concrete, so we put it here. Generally, if it can get, again, 6 to 8 hours of sun is ideal. And be prepared. Potato plants are big. If you've never seen a potato plant, this thing is going to be huge. So give it some space.
And then next year, you start completely over.
Is it possible that things can get too much sun? Like in this sun from morning to...
Not so much that they'll get too much, it's that you'll need to water it more. That's all. Yeah, and just, you know, test your soil. A lot of people say, well, how much water, how often, how deeply? If you're watering something like this, watering with a hose is really going to beat it up. But if you get a watering can with a nice big rose on the front, it distributes. And I like this because you don't just pour from here, you can pour from here. And if it comes out gently out of a nice big rose like that, that's better than the power of the water coming out of the hose. So this is your friend when it comes to the potato towers and to your vegetable gardens. Or you can set up kind of a rotating sprinkler.
At the end of the season, do you just take that down and push, compost it or whatever, you mix it into the rest of your garden?
Sure. So the question was, at the end of the season, what do you do with this? Because the potatoes have really kind of tired out this soil. And I think you have a great idea. Don't throw it away. Put it into other areas in your garden. And in the spring, you'll need fresh wheat straw. You'll need fresh compost in there to start again for the next season. Yes, ma'am.
Wheat straw doesn't break down very well.
It breaks down slowly. Yeah, the wheat straw I wouldn't put back in the garden, just the compost.
Does this need watering right after you put in this?
That's always best when you're planting things to water right afterwards, because those roots are going into new dry soil. You want to water it, encourage them to spread out. So that's a great question. Yes, sir.
Using your soil, is there any reason to do any additional treatment or fertilizing throughout the season?
I don't do any fertilizer. One thing I do if I'm noticing leaves looking a little anemic in my garden, and I'm not seeing it in my vegetable gardens, but I grow a plant called comfrey. It's an old-fashioned medicinal herb. I love it. It takes over the world, so you have to be careful, but you take the leaves and you soak them in water, kind of chop them up and soak them in water and make comfrey tea, and I'll put that on the leaves of plants if they're looking a little yellow, a little anemic. Another really much easier, great way to do that is to make compost tea. So to feed your leaves on your plants, you can take compost, put it in a bucket with a lid, like a 5-gallon bucket, fill it up with water and let it sit. Then to put it into you want to put it through like a kitchen strainer or something to put it in here because it'll clog this rose up if the compost is getting in. But now you've got lovely brown water, and you water the leaves with it, and that gets those nutrients directly because the leaves are absorbing, your plant's absorbing water not just through its roots, but some through the leaves as well. Thank you folks so much for coming. You've been a great audience. But if you have questions, this is Brad. I'm gonna get choked up now. He's my manager. And he really thinks it's important to hire knowledgeable people. You can go to a big box store, but if you come here, you're getting a family business where they really value hiring people who have backgrounds in horticulture, who can answer your questions and answer them knowledgeably, and that's to his credit.
Shannon's a wealth of knowledge, so any questions you have, she knows more than I know about gardening, so I know the grass, she knows the garden.